Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lauren Cornegay-Dollar and I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator here at the National Museum of the Pacific War. We are really excited you were able to join us today for our first webinar of 2025. And I can see from our comment section that some of you guys know the drill. I love to see where everybody is streaming in from. So as you log on, if you could tell us where you're coming in from, I'll give some shout outs. I see a fair representation from Texas already. Some in Dallas and Kerrville. I also see California and Nebraska, and we've got Washington as well, Wisconsin, Arkansas. I see we have several of our audience members already locked in and ready to go. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest presenters for today. We have two for you. Today we'll be joined by authors Amy Rupertus Peacock and Don Brown, authors of Old Breed General. Amy, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Hello, thank you, Lauren. We are so thrilled to be here with you all and talk about this World War II Pacific history that is close to my heart. Major General Rupertus was my grandfather. My dad was born in 1939. Unfortunately, Major General Rupertus's first family died of scarlet fever when he was stationed in Peking, China, with the 4th Marines, the China Marines, back in 1929, 1930. So that's why I maybe seem a little younger, but I'm thrilled to be here. Our grandfather was born in Washington, D.C. in 1889 and died in Washington, D.C. at a party of 1st Marine Division veterans at the Marine Corps Barracks at 8th and I in Washington, D.C. in March 1945. So he never got to see the end of the war. But he was a special guy in our family. Now, I met Don, my co-author. So I'm Amy Rupertus Peacock. Don Brown is my co-author. I met him in Charlotte, and he had sent me a photo. He's written over 15 books, and he's also he's an attorney as well as a former US Navy JAG officer. And he was researching a previous book called The Last Fighter Pilot. A great story, and he came across a picture of my grandfather and my grandmother in Shanghai in 1937. And he messaged me over Facebook. He said, "Amy, is this your grandfather and grandmother?" And I said, "Yes, indeed, that's him," because he recognized the last name. And he said, there's no story about him. He's pretty significant. You should write a story about him and do it before it's too late. And that got me on this mission that I hunkered down and worked on getting my grandfather's story down. We have many trunks full of military memorabilia from him because he served in the military from the DC National Guard to the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service Academy, predecessor to the Coast Guard, and then the Marine Corps from 1913 to 1945. So we had an enormous amount to work with. And we also worked a lot with the Marine Corps History Division, the National Archives, and people all around the country to help us get this story together. But it was Don who really, I come from a military family, but Don is, I'm a civilian, and Don is the military connection I needed to help get this story done. So this is Don's book, and we'll talk about that briefly, but this is a photo of my grandfather and my grandmother with a few other Marine officers and their wives and a couple Navy guys as well. And they were in Shanghai in 1937. As I said earlier, my grandfather had been in Peking, now Beijing, in 1929 and through 1931, and that's where he lost his first family. He remarried my grandmother in 1934, Sleepy, and they went on a tour of duty, and their next station was Shanghai, China. They got there. Shanghai, the international settlement in Shanghai was much bigger than the one in Peking. And they had a significant area of the American sector for the Marines to protect, these 4th Marines. But in August 1937, months after they arrived, the Japanese did a full frontal assault on Shanghai and pulled up their ships, and their landed troop bombed Shanghai, which at the time was a very metropolitan city of about 3 million people. And the city went into total chaos. It was absolute war. The Marines hunkered down. The Marines that were protecting the 3.2 perimeter of the American sector of this international settlement, set up a perimeter and had sandbags and barbed wire, and as you can see, rifles ready to make sure that the Japanese troops would not enter the American sector of the international settlement. So a lot of people wonder, when World War II was started, a lot of us who research this history, really, we don't think necessarily December 7th, 1941. We think about China in 1937. And these are some pictures that my grandfather had in our albums. You can just see the war before their eyes. It was just devastating. And the Marines were told to hold fire. So they were sitting along the perimeter and told to hold fire despite what they saw, despite the taunting of the Japanese troops, the stray shrapnel and gunfire. And it was so intense, the 6th Marines had to come in and support the 4th Marines. Eventually, Shanghai fell in November 1937, fell to the Japanese. And then the Japanese went down in Nanking, now Nanjing, and committed the rape of Nanking, as it's called. But so I always like talking about the buildup to war, because what I knew World War II in researching that the buildup happened a lot earlier than we thought, even starting in the late 1920s with the Japanese building their Navy. So our grandfather comes back to the United States. When the Japanese do come to our shores or Pearl Harbor, just as the Marines and the naval officers that were in Shanghai in 1937 predicted, and our grandfather became the assisted division commander of the 1st Marine Division. But right before that, when Pearl Harbor happened, he was head of the Marine Corps base in San Diego. And when the Japanese bombed us, he knew, as an expert rifleman and someone who'd seen the Japanese take action in China, he knew that these young Marines that were going to get revenge in the Pacific and meet this enemy would need to understand the rifle, because it would help save their lives, save their brothers' lives, and help win the war. So he wrote this, My Rifle, the Creed of a United States Marine, is a suggestion to get the Marines to better understand their rifle, and that has been recited forever. So our grandfather I knew that he had written this Rifleman's Creed. I didn't really know until I got into the research that he did a long tour in Haiti. He did 2 tours in China. He was the longest serving division commander in the Pacific of the 1st Marine Division. And he had a US naval destroyer named after him in 1945 when he died, the USS Rupertus. It still has a association that meets yearly. So here he is, the fast forward to 1941, this is spring 1941. They're in Solomon's Island, Maryland. There's a Secretary of Navy, General Holcomb, and my grandfather, General Rupertus, on the right. I think that's Colonel Duval on the left. And they're looking at the Marines doing their amphibious training, because they had to do it inland because there was so much threat of the German subs on the coast of the East Coast. So here they are in Solomon Islands, Maryland. So that's kind of a background. We're moving pretty quickly, but 1942, things were looking tough. I mean, you can see from this map how much area the Japanese controlled and how close it was to our ally, Australia. And we needed to send some troops to go to meet these Japanese in the Pacific. So in May 1942, General Vandergrift, the commander of the 1st Marine Division, took the first echelon of Marines from the East Coast, from Virginia, down through the Panama Canal, and then they popped out to the Pacific and made their way to New Zealand. Our grandfather, because of the transportation issues, had to take the second echelon across the United States by train. They left by transport from San Francisco in June 1942. And they all rendezvoused in New Zealand by basically late June 1942. They thought they had 6 months to train, but in fact, the Joint Chiefs wanted them to move it up. So they had to get to Guadalcanal and meet the Japanese by August 1942, which was only about a month and a half later. So that's kind of the background. Don's going to take it from here and take you into the Pacific with the Marines and the Navy.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thanks, Lauren, for having us. Really appreciate the great work that y'all do there at the museum. As Amy mentioned, I've been writing a book. I've had 16 books published, 15 are on military, and the last 5 have been nonfiction. I had done a military biography called Last Fighter Pilot, which was released in 2017. Did very, very well. And that book is here. Last Fighter Pilot, I've been researching, and it was about the very final combat mission that we know of in World War II, flown off Iwo Jima, the date that the Japanese surrendered. But I learned something very quickly, which is one of the reasons I really appreciate the work that the museum does, is that you can't really understand the fabric of World War II without understanding China and going back even to the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, 1901, all the way up through Shanghai and Nanking. And so as I was researching for Last Fighter Pilot, just getting a background, I ran across this photograph. And to the lower left of that photograph is then Lieutenant Colonel William Rupertus, United States Marine Corps, who was in Shanghai. And I knew Amy, and I knew her maiden name was Rupertus, and something said, hey, give Amy a call and see if she's related to this guy. It turned out to be her grandfather, and one thing led to another. Now I want to move quickly into some of the historical context. Where Amy left off was early 1942. Let's set the stage. You know, I'll start by saying that Last Fighter Pilot and Aubrey General are 2 military biographies that I've done, but I think of all the books I've written, Aubrey General probably is the most historical significantly of any book that I've ever written, simply because, as Amy pointed out, General William Rupertus commanded the 1st Marine Division, the old breed, longer than any other general in World War II in the Pacific. He's one of the most significant military commanders in the history of the United States military, and certainly in the history of World War II, but he is the least known about because his early death meant that there were no biographies written until Aubrey General was published. Let's set the stage here, though. Early 1942, as Amy said, we had Japan attack Pearl Harbor in December. The Japanese immediately seized control of all the Western Pacific, or the Westpac, as we say in the Navy, taking down all the places that are listed here: Singapore, the Philippines, Malaysia. There was a total control. We were in a mess. We know about the Bataan Death March of April 1942. General King surrenders 75,000 joint U.S. Filipino forces. Again, this is the largest and most significant single defeat in the history of the United States Army. So as we swing into 1942, we're taking one beating after the other. A strategic decision is made, although we've declared war, to send the Army primarily to Europe and to try to battle there. So this is going to leave really the Pacific theater in the first year of the war primarily, and not to discount MacArthur, his forces or anything, but primarily the Marine Corps and the Navy are going to fight that war. We're desperately in need of a win. May of 1942, the first sort of ray of hope comes out when the Navy tangles with the Japanese Navy at Coral Sea. The battle is basically a stalemate, but the stalemate in and of itself is a psychological victory for our side, especially coming a month after the Bataan Death March. And then June of 1942, I'm an ex-naval officer, an ex-naval JAG officer. I'm pro-Navy, of course, but one of the greatest naval victories in world history occurred at Midway when, by the grace of God, the clouds open up and we see the position of the Japanese fleet, and wound up sinking 4 Japanese carriers that day. The victory at Midway, and I'll just hang here for a second, was significant because we decapitated Japan's aircraft carriers. So their ability to project power was seriously diminished, but not totally decapitated, as we'll see in a moment, because they still were very, very dangerous. General William Rupertus commanded 4 significantly historically battles in World War II. First off, he commanded the very first, this is what makes him so significant from a historical standpoint, the very first American victory on the ground in World War II, not just in the Pacific, was under General Rupertus' command at the Battle of Tulagi as part of the Solomon Islands campaign. That's like the first American win in the Revolutionary War at Lexington. We needed to win on the ground. This came in August of 1942, just 2 months after Midway. He commanded the third and final great battle at Guadalcanal, that is Henderson Field. He was in command at Battle of Cape Gloucester in New Britain, which started Boxing Day 1943, and of course the Battle of Peleliu, which we'll talk about in a second. Here's the setting of the of where the U.S. Naval Task Force is now moving. August 6, 1942, 3 years to the date before Hiroshima, our Navy is escorting the 1st Marine Division into the Solomon Islands. Now you'll see where Australia is located here in the lower left. And remember, I told you a moment ago that at Midway we had decapitated the Japanese aircraft carrier fleet. So now, because it can't project air power by their carriers because we took them all out, the position of these islands vis-a-vis Australia and other places becomes more important. So the initial battle over Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands was a battle for prepositioning air forces. And the Japanese had already started to build an airport or airfield on Guadalcanal. This is showing the approach of the 1st Marine Division as they attack the very opening ground. This is very opening ground battles of World War II for the United States. Remember, if you think about what happened in Europe, we first got involved in World War II in the European African theater in November of 1942, later at Operation Torch, when we moved the army into Africa and then across the sea into Sicily. But we're 2 to 3 months before that when Marines and naval forces are now engaging the Japanese. You can see Guadalcanal. It's an island. It's 20-some miles long, 30, 40. This is pretty big island. It looks like the state of California there in the water. But right across the island, across Sea Lark Channel, is Tulagi. You can barely see it. This was first the head of the British Solomon Islands. The British controlled Tulagi. They abandoned it. The Japanese took it, put their sea bases there. The entire sector was headquartered at Tulagi. We had to decapitate Tulagi and Tanambogo to secure all this. Here's a little closer map. You can see Guadalcanal. You can see Tenerife, the Battle of Tenerife being the first of 3 major battles. The airstrip is shown there that would later become Henderson Field as we move in. This is a picture of General Rupertus. General Vandegrift, as Amy pointed out, was in overall command of the 1st Task Force invasion of Guadalcanal, but his deputy was General Rupertus. Rupertus was assigned a Task Force yoke to attack first at Tulagi. Then Vandegrift brings the Marines on the ground without a lot of opposition initially at Guadalcanal, but we had a hot opposition at Tulagi. A picture of the general, a USS Neville, on D-Day at Tulagi. And the U.S. Marine Raiders were involved. We're going to show you a few Navy photographs coming ashore with the Raiders coming ashore in Tulagi, August 7th, 1942, which was D-Day. This was a very daring invasion. General Rupertus, I call him the George S. Patton of the Pacific. He was a very, very daring and audacious commander. Kind of like Patton, or kind of like going back to the Civil War. Stonewall Jackson was very audacious. He was that type of a commander, and he did this very thing in Tulagi. If you look at Tulagi here, up in the upper left, you'll see, of course, it goes from the northwest to the southeast, kind of like from Oregon to Florida. Well, the Japanese were headquartered in the very southeastern tip, down to the lower right. And they knew we were coming, but they had their forces massed in the lower right. General Rupertus engineers this daring attack where his raiders hit in the upper northwest portion of Tulagi and moved down and hit the Japanese from the backside. It was a daring mission. Photograph of Tulagi, again, the first American victory on the ground, burning August 7th, 1942. Our Marines are moving there in Tulagi from left to right. It's only about 3 miles down there, but they're coming through the jungle. They hit the Japanese from the backside. Now, right just off the coast of Tulagi, there were these islets of Gavatu and Tanambogo. This is where the Japanese Air Force was located with their seaplanes. They posed a great threat. This is all part of the operation as well. More photos there of Gavatu burning. You can see the land bridge there again on D-Day of 1942, the first American victory on the ground in the war, commanded by General Rupertus. Here's a picture of General Rupertus with his staff at Tulagi Island. He is in the middle row, kind of like the first guy. I think you can see an arrow pointing to him, looking out at you there. Good-looking guy. One of the things that maybe you guys are aware of because you're involved in the Pacific War, but this Battle of Savo Island, we talked about what a great victory Midway was, and we all know that Pearl Harbor was the deadliest attack on our naval forces. Savo Island has been lost in history. August 8th to 9th, 1942, even though we had decapitated the Japanese aircraft carrier force, they were still lethal, and they came down this area, which I'll show you in a moment, with their cruisers, the slot, and they hit us at night. We weren't prepared to engage in night warfare in the Navy. We lost multiple ships. Over 1,000 American sailors died, and this is the day after D-Day. And that, unfortunately, has got lost in history, and so is their sacrifice. But this is the environment that we were in. General Rupertus, I call him the George S. Patton of the Pacific, but he really was much more diplomatic. He established diplomatic relations, and here you're seeing him with some of the natives there on Tulagi Island. And the gentleman in the middle is an Australian coast watcher who had been there and provided intelligence prior to the invasion. Just another picture of the position of Guadalcanal. Tulagi there, you can see Sava Island. The Sea Lark Channel later became known as Iron Bottom Sound because so many ships were sunk there going back and forth. General Rupertus, after taking Tulagi, would go back and forth by a little ferry boat between Henderson Field and Tulagi. It was very, very dangerous. This area was full of Japanese submarines. He took his life in his hands every time he tried. This is headquarters in Guadalcanal in September of 1942. General Rupertus is there on the right with General Vandegrift, and he received, Amy pointed out, she's got a great museum there in a home, the Society of Red Tape, designed by Dr. Seuss in September of 42. Nobody knows what's going on. And this is Admiral Nimitz, the great Admiral Chester Nimitz, pinning the Navy Cross on General Rupertus, in part because of his command and winning the first American ground battle in World War II. This is what I mentioned earlier, the slot. This is why the Japanese Navy remained dangerous. There's Rabaul on New Britain. And the cruisers, Admiral Yamamoto was headed there. They would come down this little red area into Guadalcanal at night, every night, and simply pound our troops and sink our ships. And they had no aircraft carriers, but they were a lethal force. Rabaul is where Admiral Yamamoto later took off when he was shot down over Bougainville. But you can kind of get a picture of what was going on. This is Eleanor Roosevelt. After General Rupertus commanded the final battle of Guadalcanal, that is Henderson Field, General Vandegrift had left, leaving Rupertus in charge. We secured Guadalcanal, and the 1st Marine Division was raked by malaria. We brought them into Australia, and while there, Eleanor Roosevelt decided she wanted to come visit, much to the general's chagrin, to all the generals, I should say, because they're trying to fight a war. But Rupertus was designated as their escort officer. Here's a great shot that Amy has in her personal collection. She was with the Red Cross. Here are some photographs. Lower left are those boats going back and forth across Iron Bottom Sound I was telling you about. And to the right, a parade there in Australia. This is a personal note from Eleanor Roosevelt to General Rupertus after he escorted her there. And to the left is General Rupertus putting an award on, I think it's Navy Cross, I'm not sure what it was, to the great Marine Chesty Puller. And far right, you can see planning there for the next operations. After Tulagi and the Solomon Islands, the plan was island hopping. So New Britain was next on the list. And so you can see where New Britain is moving west in toward the Japanese islands. And we attacked under General Rupertus' leadership, December 26, 1943. General MacArthur loved Rupertus so much that he talked, actually, President Roosevelt into assigning the 1st Marine Division under his command, under an Army command, rather than a Navy command for this next invasion on New Britain. And part of the idea here was, you remember I pointed out Bougainville a moment ago, which isn't shown on this map. Excuse me, Bougainville is, but right up here where they were launching the Japanese attacks, we were going to move in there and try to take all of this and just move them out. Rabaul is where the Japanese Navy was now headquartered. So we hit New Britain to try to eventually go and take out Rabaul. And on this map, Rabaul isn't shown, but it's in the upper right of New Britain. That objective took place on December 26, 1943, when our troops, or our Marines under the command of General Rupertus, attacked at Cape Gloucester in the southwestern part of the island. Here's some photographs from there. This is a letter from President Roosevelt congratulating General Rupertus on securing the island at Cape Gloucester. Some more photographs. They called it the Green Monster because the rain was so horrible. The malaria was bad. Mosquitoes were bad. And here is the general's biggest admirer, probably. That is General Douglas MacArthur, who again lobbied to have the 1st Marine Division under his command for Cape Gloucester. Roosevelt let him do it one time. So it's an interesting relationship. Now, after this, we continue sweeping across the Pacific. Again, this is an island hopping campaign. And the next target was Peleliu. Now, some of you all may know about Peleliu. Peleliu was the subject. But before I get there, this is Bob Hope, who came to entertain the troops at Pavuvu Island just before Cape Gloucester. And Bob Hope was a great American. But let's go back to where we were. So this is Peleliu Island. And as you can see, it is just to the east of the Philippines. This is now August of 1944. And the thing to understand is that a great debate had taken place between the Army and the Navy. Navy, Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy, and the naval admirals in charge of prosecuting the war, namely Bull Halsey, Chester Nimitz, were advocating skipping the Philippines altogether and moving straight north into Japan. We can see Japan is just north of Peleliu, but MacArthur wanted to fulfill his promise, I shall return, when he left Corregidor, when the Philippines fell in April of 42. Now, the reason MacArthur was pushing for this invasion of Peleliu, which again, the Navy was not in favor of this invasion, that they wanted to go straight in, is because, again, there was an airstrip there at Peleliu, and those Japanese airplanes from Peleliu would have hit MacArthur from the backside when he stepped back into the Philippines. So we move into Peleliu, and it becomes the bloodiest, it really becomes the bloodiest battle in the war in the Pacific up to this point. We won the war, and you can see there's some photographs of Peleliu. You can see where the airfield was there. The Army was supposed to get involved, but the Japanese shifted their battle tactics from what we call retreat and ambush to dig in and resist. Now, you remember when I described the Solomon Islands earlier, Tulagi was very active. There was nowhere for the Japanese to run. General Rupertus hit them and won that campaign. It took them 2 days to secure the first American victory. But just 20 miles to the south at Guadalcanal, General Vandergrift marched his Marines in onto the beach with no resistance. The Japanese retreated and then would ambush later. All that changed at Tulagi. There was no retreat, no ambush. Our naval intelligence wasn't good. The Japanese, for the first time, were hiding in caves. We would see this again in the Pacific, at Iwo Jima, and at various other islands in the Pacific. But we got hit and surprised a little bit, and it became a very, very, very bloody type of battle. You're seeing some maps here from Peleliu. That campaign ran from September to October, and then General Rupertus was brought back in November. But these are some more photographs at Peleliu at D-Day. You're looking at 100-degree temperatures. And here's some photographs after Peleliu is finally secured. Some more photographs on the ground. This is a real, again, a Navy photograph showing a funeral service there. And General Rupertus is 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth from the left, bowing his head. To his immediate right is the great Marine Chesty Puller as they bury some of their fallen warriors there on the island at Peleliu. Some more photographs. This is a great picture. To the right is General Rupertus and Amy, my co-author's father, who became Captain Rupertus, who was a Marine Corps pilot, went to Naval Academy. And it's just a great story. I want to kind of close with this before I flip it back over. What you're seeing here are several things that show just how significant General Rupertus was to the United States and to the U.S. Marine Corps. Upper left is Amy's grandmother, Sleepy Rupertus, who is christening a destroyer, the USS Rupertus, that was named for the general. And the ship is to the lower left. And there, this is at Okinawa. That flag flew over Peleliu, flew over Cape Gloucester, and also on the ship. It was placed there by a colonel who was a friend and served under General Rupertus. He's one of the greatest military officers in history. And I'm just honored to be a part of this project. I'm going to flip it back over to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Don, for the closing out of the presentation. But I am actually going to toss it over to Amy because I believe you had an audio clip you wanted us to share. Can you give us a little bit of context for it?
Okay, so about this audio, we have never heard our grandfather's voice. I don't think my dad did because my grandfather died. His father died when my dad was only 6 years old. But we came across this. It's from the Peleliu Media Institute in California. It's when my grandfather came back from the Pacific with a couple other thousand of Marines. He was interviewed by CBS Radio about the war, and it was right around the Marine Corps birthday. And this is about a 2-minute audio that we found, and we finally got to hear his voice. It was not what we imagined, but pretty resolute. So you can play it.
General, which do you consider the toughest of these operations?
I don't believe there's any measure of comparison. Each campaign was against the same fanatically determined enemy, and each had its own problems of weather, terrain, and distribution of enemy strength. All the campaigns against the Japanese have been hard, bitterly contested operations that have demanded the utmost of every man engaged in them. I know that every man in every branch of the military service fighting in the Pacific is willingly giving everything he has to achieve a common goal, the complete defeat of the Japanese enemy. If that aim is to be reached, the people back home, each related in blood to a fighting man, must contribute in the same measure. The war against the Japanese is a very personal war. Every bomb and every bullet sounds as though it is meant for you in person. Much of the fighting is at the closest quarters. You are the man that Saki-crazed warrior is charging at as he runs screaming toward your lines. You are the man that gleaming samurai sword is going to cut through if you don't strike first. That's just what we've been doing out there, striking first and striking hard.
Well, it seems to have been working pretty well, General. We've gone a long way in the Pacific in the last 2 years. Do you think we're close to our goal of complete defeat of the Japanese?
The hardest part of the war lies ahead of us. As we get closer to the Japanese homeland, the Japanese determination and fanaticism becomes even greater. Their military strength also increases as we get closer to its source. This is certainly no time to sit back and contemplate our past successes. Rather, we should consider the tremendous task that lies ahead and mentally resolve to match in willing personal contribution, inspired by a love of country, the fanatic devotion to the emperor that spurs the Japanese.
Well, Friday was the 169th anniversary of the founding of the United States Marine Corps, General. What do you think the 170th year holds for the Corps?
I think it will probably be one of the fightingest years in our fighting history. We Marines are naturally proud of our past achievements, and as a Marine, I can assure the people of the United States that every man in the Corps will be doing everything he can to sustain our record and justify the motto of the Marine Corps, Semper Fidelis, always faithful.
Thank you, General, and I'm sure that every Marine will.
Okay, thank you for providing us with that clip. I think it was really amazing to hear. In fact, we already have a question about the clip, and we have some other questions that popped in first, but I'm going to ask the question about the clip first. Can you tell us a little bit about where the general acquired his distinct accent?
Well, he grew up in a German-American family. Like in Washington, D.C., when he was born, there was a huge German-American community. And I think maybe that was it. He also spoke several different languages. So it's definitely a unique dialect or way of speaking.
Yeah, I noticed it too. Okay, so our first question that came in asks, how many Marines were in Shanghai in 1937 and why were they there?
Oh, good question. I'm sorry I jumped over that. I don't know the exact number of the Marines, but back in the teens, 20s, and 30s, before the Japanese attacked us and everything changed, we had, there were international settlements in China. These were carved out kind of, people refer to island enclaves where foreigners could come into China and do business in China. And every country that was there in these international settlements brought their guards. So America brought their Marines, and it was the 4th Marines, and they were called the China Marines. And they were there in different cities, Peking, Tianjin, and then Shanghai. And Shanghai was probably the biggest settlement and most international community. But the perimeter was about 3.2 miles wide. And there's a great site you can look up called the China Marine, chinamarine.org or .com, but it will tell you more about that.
And quickly add to that, this goes back to the Boxer Rebellion in 1901, 1900, when you had multiple nations coming in to attempt to stabilize China, including the biggest ones being United States, Russia, France, England, and Japan were all there. So that Marine contingent goes back to the multinational force that came out of the Boston Rebellion.
Thank you for that answer. Our next question is, given how many battles he was responsible for winning, why has so little been written about him?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think the Marine Corps has so much going on all the time. I think because my grandfather died in 1945 and this war was still going on, and then next thing you know, we're in the Korea War, we're rebuilding Japan, then we're in the Korea War, and then Vietnam. I mean, I think he just kind of got lost to history, like so many of these people that I researched, the fascinating characters that have been lost to history. And I think it's real important, if we do have family stories or connections, that we make an effort as the surviving family to research them and write about them, whether it's in a blog post or, write a book.
And just to add that's a big mystery. This is, again, one of the greatest military leaders in our history. But you look at the timing of his death. It was in the spring of 45. He died literally within a few weeks of President Roosevelt. Then you had VE Day. The Nazis fell. And then you transition into the summer of 45, leading up to the dropping of the atomic bomb in the war. And because the general had passed away, somehow, some way, this got lost. Of course, I'm lucky to join with Amy to help bring the story to life. And I'm sure there are going to be other books and movies written. But y'all, if you get the book, certainly you're going to be reading unreported history, for the first time. And we just appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this great story.
On that note, if you are looking to purchase their book, you can go through our online store to purchase their book. Also, if you are looking to do any kind of research about any family members that might have served in the Pacific Theater during World War II, please know that we have a library and archives available, and you could submit a request to do research yourself. Moving on, we have 2 more questions. Our first one is, how did the general die?
He died. He, at the time he was stationed in, after the Pacific, he came back to head the Marine Corps schools in Quantico. And he and my grandmother, his wife, Sleepy, and my dad went up to DC for a party of 1st Marine Division veterans at the Marine Corps barracks at 8th and I. And it was during that party that he stepped outside, didn't feel well, and ended up having a heart attack on the steps of Colonel Kilmartin's house, which was his chief of staff at Tulagi. So, yeah, that's how he died.
We have one last question, and then I have a question that I'd like to ask. This last question we have is about the formative period. Can you tell us a little bit about the formative period in the 20s and 30s?
Okay, so he joined. He was in ROTC in high school, and then he went into the National Guard, the DC National Guard. He enlisted, and then he did so well, he got promoted to an officer, and something inspired him to leave there and go to the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service Academy to be a cutter service member of the cutter service. So he graduated second in his class, but he was told during a medical that he had Bright's disease and he would die within 5 years. So by 25 or so, he was supposed to be dead. So with that information, he submitted a request to join the Marine Corps as an officer, and he took the examination and he was accepted. And I think because the Marine Corps was headquartered in Washington, D.C., it made sense. But he had, served around the world, or gone all around the world with the Revenue Cutter Service Academy, and then took that experience and put it into the Marine Corps. So he served in Haiti when there was disarray, and helped build the Garde de Haiti. And then he was again in Peking, and then Shanghai. And really, it was those years in China where he witnessed his future foe.
All right. That is quite an incredible story. I'm glad that we decided to go there and touch on his earlier years as well. There is a little story that you were discussing yesterday when we were doing our little run through in our rehearsal. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the Piper Cub planes?
Sure. Well, one little story that I really loved when I came across this research is on the Battle of Cape Gloucester, the natives had told the Marines planners that this was a bad time in December to try to do a battle because it was going to be the monsoon season. It was going to be rainy. It was going to be messy. And well, the Marines had no opportunity to slow down. So, it was full press ahead. So they went in on December 26th, 1943, and it became a real slog. And for the troops inland, the tanks couldn't get there. And then the big bombers came to try to drop food down and rations for the Marines. It was so dangerous. They had to run for cover. So my grandfather got approval from General Vandergrift to go buy some piper clubs from the Army. He really saw those piper clubs as a tool to help these Marines that were deep in the jungle in Cape Gloucester. So he got those piper clubs and got his pilot and another pilot to vet and train Marines to fly these piper clubs and do missions to help the troops inland in Cape Gloucester. And they delivered blood or plasma, food, mail. They did reconnaissance, artillery spotting, and it was really a neat a period where he helped solve a problem and help the troops.
Yes, that's some creative problem solving there.
Yeah.
We have one more question that's come in, and then we've run a little long today, so we'll probably close it out with this last question. Where does the name Old Breed come from?
Don, you want to take that?
Well, the name of the Old Breed is the name of the 1st Marine Division. It was the very first of several Marine divisions that were in operation during World War II, and they're the first ones, so they get to call the Old Breed. And of course, Old Breed General is the name of the book incorporates that. There was the great book by Sedge about the With the Old Breed, but it's they're the first, they're the oldest. And interesting, the United States Navy, the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps predate our constitutional republic itself. All were formed in 1775 before the Declaration of Independence was signed. So it kind of its roots all the way back to the birthday of the Marine Corps, which is November the 10th, 1775, the day before what we recognize as Veterans Day. And of course, I got to plug the Navy. That's October 13th, 1775. And the Army, for anybody out there, is Flag Day, November 14th. But it goes back to the fact that 1st Marine Division was the Old Breed, the first ones born in the Marine Corps, which expanded, I think, close to 7 at one point in World War II. But they're still the first, and they'll tell you they're still the best.
I love that. Okay. I would like to say thank you to our presenters. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your day with us and for sharing this incredible story. I know that I learned a lot from today, and I'm sure our at-home audience did as well. I'm going to plug a couple of our upcoming events now. So we have some in-person and some virtual programs coming up for you in February. First one up is the annual Nimitz dinner. That will be on February 13th. It's a Thursday. It will start at 5 o'clock. Tickets are already on sale. This year, we're recognizing Robert and M. Gates. For more information, please visit our website. Next up, we have our Day of Remembrance in-person program on Saturday, February 15th. That will start at 11 a.m. Our guest presenters are Connie and Kent Matsumoto. And they will be presenting on their book Of White Ashes. It is the story of Kent's parents. And then we have our virtual program, the next webinar, which will be on Day of Remembrance, Wednesday, February 19th. Our guest presenter is Hanako, and she's the executive director of the Japanese American Museum from Oregon. So she'll be streaming in from Oregon for this. And last up, we have our Iwo Jima commemoration. We have a whole weekend of events scheduled, including a plaque dedication, presentations by Richard B. Frank and John Parshall, a battle reenactment, and much more. So please look for more information about that on our website, and we hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining us today.